Welcome to ECR Tours. We begin once again with more important videos. Today we are exploring the problems in Africa. In recent times, there has been fire right activities within the entire Europe continent, mostly directed at migrants crossing the boat. These may not necessarily be direct African issues, but it's of interest to actually explore the reason why Africa and a continent blessed with so much natural resources continues to remain poor. And so the video that I'm making today is entitled The Wealth of Katanga, Why Africa with the Most Wealth Remains Poor. Katanga is a city in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, to basically give you some statistics, the World Bank report on DCR, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2023, came up with a report that 74.6% of inhabitants of the Democratic Republic of Congo remains in extreme poverty. 1% have access to electricity and 83% have no access to clean water. And this is a nation that is endowed with the most natural resources, and yet its inhabitants are living in extreme poverty. Now, whilst it is difficult for one to actually pinpoint one issue as being the direct cause of this problem, we try to look at the history of Africa in general. So Africa is a continent that has been enslaved for 400 years plus, and therefore the curse of that slavery has not been helping the situation. Also, its colonial past has also attributed to the problems that it actually faces currently. But come the 1960s, most of these African countries obtain independence from their colonial masters. Currently, 55 countries of African states are independent. There isn't any other African country that is not independent. But then the problem is, when we look at their current situation, it appears that the independence has not brought any benefits or very little benefits to its people. And this is why we actually explore that subject, why a continent with so much wealth have so much poverty. Before, people would have attributed its problems to the colonial past, but now that they have actually emancipated themselves from colonial rule, one then expects an improvement in its living standards and its economic standards. And if this was to be true in the continent of Africa, then surely there wouldn't be such numbers of migration into the European and other continents. And so, once again, the wealth of Katanga. In looking at this research, there's an article that actually stood out, which I am going to read through, and it will give us a clear direction of what the causes has been for the African continent's poverty story. So this article is written by Kieron Monks. He's a CNN correspondent, and his title is Why the Wealth of Africa Does Not Make Africans Wealthy. Now, if you're new to our channel, remember to subscribe to the channel. Remember to share its content. We're bringing you a new wave of interesting information that will help you to learn about the political structure of the world. So this article, as it's written by the CNN correspondent, it says Katanga province is in the Democratic Republic of Congo Katanga province in the Democratic Republic of Congo is blessed with enormous natural wealth, including vast deposits of precious minerals such as diamond, gold, and titanium. Katanga saw a spectacular mining boom around the turn of the century when President Laurent Desire Kabila and then his son Joseph licensed international mining companies to tap its treasures. One must also make this issue clear that this type of situation is not isolated to Democratic Republic of Congo, but on the entire continent of Africa. We see in the Zambia where the copper mining industry has come under the same level of disproportionate deals that has not yielded any benefit to the people of Zambia. This arrangement generated riches for the Congolese elite and vastly more for the prospectors, but offered little to the poverty-ravaged population. From 1999 to 2002, the Kabila regime transferred ownership of at least $5 billion of assets from the state mining sector to private companies under its control, with no compensation or benefit for the state treasury, a United Nations investigations found. And so you can see that these are the problems of Africa, that is its own leaders. And so you see that Laurent Kabila, as it seems, may have had all these mining deals, and yet whatever was allocated for the state, which is estimated at $5 billion, monies that are supposed to be going into the state coffers, was actually diverted to a private company. And so you see a leader that is not actually working for the best interest of its nation. This is also very evident in the Zambia story, and even currently in Ghana under the Akufo-Addo regime. The bonanza coincided with a ruthless crackdown on dissidents. In 2004, a small, mostly civilian group took over a mine operated by the Australian firm Anvil Mining in Kilwa village, protesting that the company was making huge profit without rewarding the local workforce. So once again, you can see multinational companies or corporations operating in Africa without actually handing any of the benefits to its people. And why does that happen? The reason is that Kabila, who was then the president, actually works with these foreign companies to his own benefit, but to the detriment of his own people. According to a UN report, the Congolese army crushed the uprising and killed around 100 people, many by summary execution. So you can see how the land is being destroyed for this extraction activity. So that picture shows workers extracting cobalt from a lake in Katanga province, Democratic Republic of Congo. So all this is public information. However, you know, these videos are made so that people that may not have time to read them can just listen to them on the go and to gain an understanding of the plight of the poverty issues in Africa, what the causes have been. Modern colonialism. The combination of staggering wealth, rampant violence, and abject poverty in Democratic Republic of Congo is no coincidence, but part of a pattern causing devastation across Africa, according to Financial Times investigative journalist Tom Burgess. In a new edition of his book, The Looting Machine, the author probes the paradox of the continent that is at once the world that it was once the world's poorest and arguably its richest. Burgess, a former correspondent in Lagos and Johannesburg, finds a wide range of variety of kleptocrats and rackets over his travel through dozens of resource-rich countries. But a common thread is that the wholesale expropriation of resources during colonial times has barely slowed down through the post-independence era, albeit with its new beneficiaries. Now, the purpose basically of me stumbling across this information is my own research into the challenges of Africa and the impact of neocolonialism in Africa. This is what led me onto this information, and it's actually necessary to share it in this season where there has been extreme far-right activities in Europe to help the people to understand the plight of Africa and these other places and how they actually impact the movement of people around the world. Western governments are not supposed to wield commercial and political power at the same time, but certainly not to use one to benefit the other, says Burgess. In colonial states, the British or Portuguese will cultivate a small group of local people who would fuse political and commercial power to control the economy. When the foreign powers leave, you are left with an elite that has no division between political and commercial power. The only source of wealth is mines or oil fields, and that is a recipe for ultra-corrupt state. Somewhere like Nigeria, an extractor elite wanted to draw to itself the rent that oil and mining resources generate. Burgess cites another colonial hangover in the continued presence of power of oil and mining firms. The multinational companies hold enormous economic and political power in post-independent Africa, he says. In this way, there is a pretty straight line from colonial exploitation to modern exploitation. And so you can see that from this article, the structures of merging basically political and commercial power, these were structures instituted by the British and also the Portuguese in Africa, such that when they left, this structure has been set up to allow that fusion. And one can say that it may not have just happened as a coincidence, but as a plan, so that when they left, they could use these people to actually continue their exploitation of the continent. And then when there are migration issues, they then find ways to blame the same continent, as if that they have not actually had any hand in the effect of what the current migration has been. So British businessman Cecil Rhodes, as you may have seen him in this picture, I will go back. Yes, that's it. We will carry on. So fueling oppression. The ability of governments to rely on resource revenue leads to the corruption and oppression, Burgess argue, as they are not accountable to their people through a social contract based on taxation and representation. He cites Angola, which earns almost half of its GDP from oil, as an example of government as a service for the elite. A 2011 IMF audit reveals that 32 billion disappeared from official accounts between 2007 and 2010, a quarter of the state's income. The Angola elite rejects accountability and does not tolerate any challenge from the public, Burgess adds, recalling the recent case of activists being jailed for a public reading of a pro-democracy book. Government can behave that way if it doesn't need the consent of its people, the author says. Angola has taken steps to address such criticism in recent years, with the 2012 election deemed really free and fair by neutral observers, but human rights groups attest that oppression remains a fact of life. And so really, the real problem, as we can see, that in reality, these countries or this continent does not have the independence. They are being controlled from external sources, and their leaders are basically acting as proxies for the interest of the former colonial masters, and also for the local elites, rather than for the development and for the emancipation of its people. So this article gives a clear indication of what the real problem of Africa has been, and until this situation changes, the dynamics and the challenges of the world will continue unabated. So there's a garbage pile up here, as you can see, in Angola. Even on environmental issues, we have seen the exportation of garbage from wealthy nations into African nations and poor regions in Asia for the disposal of garbage that in effect should be actually handled by multinational corporations that are actually producing products that leave this waste in the system. So secret deals. The growth of offshore banking in the late 20th century created new opportunities for resource tycoons to cover their tracks. A practice laid bare in the Panama Papers. Israeli businessman Dan Gettler was an early pioneer. After forging a close friendship with Democratic Republic of Congo President Joseph Kabila, he was granted a near monopoly on exporting the nation's diamonds and quickly became a billionaire. Gettler routed the cash through an elaborate network of offshore accounts in tax havens, keeping the details of controversial deals secret. And so Democratic Republic of Congo, it has seen a whole lot of problems, because we have the issue of King Leopold II in the 18th, 19th century, his exploitation or exploration of rubber in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and basically they call it the Holocaust of the Congo, where 16 million Africans were murdered by King Leopold II for his rubber exploitation in the Congo. So Congo has had issues, that dates back, hundreds of years. In the case of Africa's resource deals, offshore funds have been shown to conceal questionable transactions, says Burgess. In the 1980s, bribes were literally car full of cash and you handed the key to the official you were trying to bribe. Bribery now is much more sophisticated and has become more harder to define as bribery. If it's through offshore transactions or people being given equity shares in offshore companies, you have to crack open a lot of offshore secrecy to see the conflict of interest that lies at the heart of them. The era of global finance has opened Africa's market to a new generation of mysterious traders. Burgess spent years in the trail of elusive Chinese businessman Sampa, who has cycled through multiple allies while making deals across the continent from Angola oil to Zimbabwe diamonds. Pa is believed to lead the secretive Queensway Investor Group, and Burgess claims he has represented the Chinese state, although the government denies this. So as you can see there, Jean Champagne, Mugabe, and I suppose the Chinese guy in the middle must be Sampa, and obviously other officials of the then Mugabe administration. So this is taken in Harare, and that's President Mugabe. Breaking the chain. Burgess is skeptical that resource industries can ever be reformed. There is a troubling possibility that it's not possible to put natural resources in these countries to work for the common good, says Burgess. Almost everywhere that receives a significant share of its income from oil or mining is badly run and often violent. It's in the nature of these industries to cause these problems. Botswana and South Africa have benefited from moving up the value chain, developing high-skilled industries from natural resource rather than just exporting raw materials such as diamond polishing or manufacturing metallic goods. Burgess believed that diversifying economies away from a single resource, as President Buhari's government in Nigeria is attempting to do so, can mitigate the effect of dependency. He suggests another option is to keep resources in the countries and implement high tariff to protect domestic industries, but African leaders have been reluctant to adopt such measures. We have a world trading architecture with strict rules on imposing tariffs, says Burgess. African countries have adopted the market orthodox that led them to pare down states and embrace global economic competition in which they are overwhelmingly losers. And so, once again, you see this issue here where the World International Trade, so the World Trade Organization, WTO, is also one of the network of organizations that continues to basically suppress the continent of Africa through its trade, one should say treaties or trade deals or trade rules. And so, as you can see at this point, that these African nations are actually the overall losers in these trade deals that they actually carry out. So you can see some professional diamond cutters, most likely in what country? Let's see. This is here in Botswana. So it's a diamond polishing factory in Botswana, part of a highly skilled industry that has been developed from the nation's raw material. So, collective complexity. Responsibility for the plight of resource-dependent nation go beyond traders and dictators. The global economy still requires a huge supply of raw materials that originate in Africa, creating an imperative to maintain the existing destructive model. Burgess applauds steps as the Kimberley process for preventing blood diamond trade, but feels that developed nations could go further. The lessons for those in the West who wants to address the damage from oil and mining industry and the corruption that goes with them is put your own house in order, he says. There has been a tendency to lecture African rulers, but the problems are in the world financial system. Fine, there's a great degree of truth in what Burgess is saying, but the point is that the African leaders are also the problem. And once again, there are issues where the leaders, the African leaders that have actually worked hard to help their people, most of them had been eliminated through domestic opposition and in collaboration with foreign entities. And we see that in the case of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, basically when he was ousted in 1966, which is with the help of foreign entities. And this is also evident in the Congo, when we also have the issue of Patrice Lumumba and Mobutu Sese Seko. And so these things go on. And so if these are going to carry on, then obviously nations must be ready to accept the consequences of such issues happening in the world. The author suggests a global public registry of companies and trust to counter the use of shell companies in illicit deals. That financial secrecy is available is not Africa's fault, says Burgess, addresses the part that sits within the global system, which can be regulated from Western capital. The nature of the global supply chain means that complexity with the crimes around resource extraction extends from Africa's dictators all the way to a European mobile phone buyer. At every level, delusion is a powerful barrier to change. Burgess recalled a meeting with a leading figure of Angola's kleptocratic regime, who argues passionately that he was protecting his people from even worse abuses. It's human nature, says Burgess. Nobody thinks they are the bad guy. And so this is a wonderful article that actually gives us an idea of what the problem of Africa has been, the reason why it remains in poverty. So it's a combination of the leaders that are elected into power in these African countries and the foreign entities being the former colonizers, their structures and systems of neocolonialism that currently operates in the African system, i.e. in its politics, in its economics, in its finances or financial issues, in its commercial matters, even in its culture, because there is that cultural imperialism that shapes the thinking of the African people. And it's not just the African people, but the Asian continent, even in South America, which actually gives that impression that people have to migrate into European and Western economies to actually have a better living. And obviously, the other side of the problem is that the African countries are not also doing their bit to create industries, to support those local economies, to produce food, basically agriculture, and also industries to process these agricultural produce and create jobs to keep people in their local economies. And so if the West continues, or this system continues where, Western entities are collaborating with African political dissidents and also even African political leaders to basically take its resources for the benefit of the few to the detriment of the masses of the people, then you are surely going to have this problem of mass movement of people from Africa into the European continent and other continents. Currently, China is also very active in Africa, and they are actually creating an alternative for the governments of Africa, as we saw former President Mugabe and Deng Xiaoping in the meeting where obviously Zimbabwean diamonds was a topic. Thank you once again for watching EECR Tours. I hope that this video has made a difference. It's a learning platform. If you have an opinion or if you know the reason why the African continent remains poor, or if you think that this article does not actually represent the issues in Africa, then surely you can also add your comments and contributions. Remember to like our videos, share, and definitely happy to hear your opinion. Obviously, this article is public information, so there is nothing new, but it's basically I'm making this video to basically bring that awareness to the people concerning Africa, its resources, and its poverty. So thank you for watching The Wealth of Katanga, why Africa with the most wealth remains poor.